we're going to use silk for the base of our applique. I've noticed within Avicol, a few people like to use scrap pieces of silk or thinner material, and it's quite thin and fine. This is not heavy enough to do and support a heavy embroidery. So what you have to do, if you choose to use a thin fabric, that's fine, but I highly recommend putting a backing on it. In the Middle Ages, they would have backed it with a heavy linen. We can use a fusible interfacing now. All right, the other thing is a few of you, I know you like to use the bamboo hoops, so this is going to be important to you. If you use the bamboo hoop, you can tighten as much. You're going to have all kinds of give, and it'll slide off on you if you don't have the binding on it. So if I try and do that same with this one, so you get not quite, you still get some give, but not as much. You can tighten her up, get a much tighter go, and when you go to sliding it off, it's much harder. So that becomes important. So I highly recommend you use bias tape and wrap your inside hoop. It just adds enough padding that when you're doing the embroidery, it maintains the tension better. All right, now that I've freehanded the design, I did use a leaf cutout simply to ensure that the leaves were uniform in how they're drawn. I'm going to do the embroidery with vines I got at the Value Village. It is called a puncher's craft. This whole set cost me $7, I think. It is a lace weight and it is used for punch embroidery, but it is 100% acrylic. I am, as you can tell, not worried about using period with this because it's going on a bag with scraps I have lying around. I like this because it has the feel of wool, and I can go show you 100% wool as well. I wanted to talk a little bit about materials. This is the acrylic I'm going to be using. I tend to use acrylic on anything that is going into a modern washing machine, is going to be washed multiple times, or if it's going to be in something that doesn't require the cost of period materials. It is very, very similar to the red, which is 100% lace weight wool. But you're going to get more give on the non-wool, and it's going to withstand a lot more. All of that is my opinion. I'm also going to talk a bit about period materials. Because I'm planning for this to go in a pouch, which is a cotton on scraps that I have available, and it's going to be thrown into largesse to hand out to people at events. But I also wanted to give you an idea of actual materials. This is the linen that a lot of people use for embroidery in the SCA. The thing about this linen is it's costuming linen and it's scrap and it's a medium weight. So it's much lighter, it has a lot more give. If you're going to do a heavy weight surface embroidery on that, you're going to need to either double it up so that you don't get the scrunches on the edges of your embroidery and that it has a support. I have been practicing with the heavier weight. This is the same linen, same costuming linen. It's a heavier weight linen, and it seems to hold up a bit better. And it has a little more structure to it, and it's doing a bit better. If you want to get into period type of linen, you are into the actual embroidery linen that we use for white work and sorry. Right, this is the linen you use for embroidery. This is what you would be using. It costs about $100 a meter. It is used for hardanger. It's used for white work. It is much, much stiffer. You can see the stiffness, and yet it still has that lightness that the medium weight linen would have. The other thing that becomes very, very important is if you look at this, your slubs are much less. It is an even weave. It's excellent for drawn work. It's perfect for pulled work. It is what most of your crewel work is done, and this is what is recommended. You're going to note on the costuming, it's also even weave, but it's not as perfect. You got more slubs. It's not going to show the embroidery as well, and that's why it is used. Okay, let's give this a go. I'm going to start with one of the basic stitches we do in the SEA, and that is the stem stitch. You do not want to get threads longer than the length of your arm because it causes the thread to fray. It's going to be tempting to do much longer pieces, just don't. So with the stem stitch and surface, I start this way. I go from the top down on the line of where I want to go. Because it's going to be appliqued over, I don't worry about going around where that applique is going to go. I pin it down. You can do 2 small knots along where the line is. Can you see that? And that is enough to hold your thread in place. You then want to come up at the starting point through your layers, and with a stem stitch you're going to go up whatever length you want it to be, loop your surface thread down and go back in about halfway, and you have the thread come up on the top, and that is a stem stitch. I tend to do it right in the same hole. You can get different designs going on, and we'll demonstrate some of those, and then you just follow that line along. Then when you get to your knot, no, you probably don't want to make too many holes. You can pull that up and the thread will hold. It will not come apart because you've oversewn it. Now, there's a couple different ways. I tend to like to go straight down and then straight back up again, depending on the thickness of the layers I'm going through. But this is why the threads can become worn as you're going back and forth. Right? The other thing you can do, and there's people who like to do this, is you can just do an angle. It won't be seen here, but in other embroideries and different threads, you can see the difference between moving it like this versus the straight up and down. I tend to prefer straight up and down, but it's really dependent on what you're wanting to do. So let's finish that thread and then I'll show you another one. And then when you're finishing, there's 2 different ways of doing it. This one, we're going to just weave it into the back of your thread. Okay, the other one I want, here I should show you in the same color, shouldn't I? Okay. Now, the other thing I want to show about stem stitch is that depending on that width, you're going to get different looks. This was a wider stitch, which makes it seem more coarse, whereas when I got up here, I put them closer together, which gives you a finer detail. Now, there is two ways to approach stem stitch. I'll do it on this side so you can see it here. I also want to show that you don't need to do it exactly that way. You can get another look from the same stitch, and that look is dependent on the length of your stitch and how you approach it. So I was going up a small amount and going halfway. There is also the approach where you go under the line on the top, but when you bring it up, you bring it up above the line, just slightly, and that gives you much more of a stem, this stem approach. As well, if I open the length up, so we'll go just above the line there, and it gives you a slightly different look to the same stitch. It's much more of a weave feel when you do that. As well, I'm opening up the length of it, because as you lengthen that stitch, you're going to get that look much more as well. And I'll see if I can demonstrate how that works out. So this I did slightly different. And it has, almost less of an outline and more of a botanical feel to it. Okay, let's see if I can get that to show. All right. You can see this is a much more tight, much more outlining what you're doing, whereas this has more of that weave look, and it gives a rougher botanical texture. So depending on what you want to achieve, pick your stitch. Okay, we'll try from the other side. We're doing stem stitch again. Yeah, okay. This time I'm going to pull out, and I'm going to show you what happens when, instead of bringing the thread down, you keep the thread up. It looks different. This is actually stem stitch, and if you end up in judging, this one is called the outline stitch. It has to do with the Z and S in weaving, and how the threads roll around one another, and it gives you a different look. The outline, it's officially called an outline stitch. It's just tighter, whereas the stem stitch has a bit more of an open flow. And I wanted to see if you could see the difference there. Let's see if we can show that this way. You can see how this becomes a stem, and this is tighter. It's different. And this is only important in a judging, and not really super important within the SCA, but it's something you should be aware of. All right, let's show another variant of the stem stitch. You start out much the same as you did before. Nope, that didn't work. Okay, this is the second variant of the, well, I guess it'd be the third variant of the stem stitch. This is called the wrap stem stitch. You are starting out just the same as you did before, and then you wrap it, and it gives a more textural feel. Running out of thread there, aren't I? Okay. We'll just end that up. I'll do a couple stay knots where it's going to be filled in, it doesn't matter. You can then and you can do this in the same color. I'm going to use a different color so you can see it better. So do a way knot, do a couple stay stitches that will be filled in later. And that's enough to stay it. Okay, we're going to come up beside it, and we want to go counter. So we want to go from this side and wrap that way. Right? This is going this way. So I'm not going through the base fabric. I'm just wrapping the stem stitch. And you wrap each of those individuals stitches you made. And don't do what I just did where you catch it. I do not perform well on video, it appears. And it doesn't need to be tight, it just needs to have whatever texture you're looking for. All of this is a surface stitching, and you want it to have a textural feel to it. And that is completely dependent on your eye and what you like. So we'll wrap that. Okay. And I have to finish that off, so we will put it away, the thread over here, for later, and just leave it there. And then it's out of the way to be used at a later point in time. All right, now I want to give a fourth and final stem stitch. And what that is the raised stem stitch. Now in the raised stem stitch, the idea is to put a base down and then do a stem stitch slightly above the surface of where you're looking at. So I want this to be the raised element, kind of like the main trunk of the tree of life. So on a way knot, I will draw, here I'll draw it so you can see it. So what I'm going to do is I want it to track all along here, right? This is where you want it to be. I'm going to finish the edges in the actual stem, but I want this to be where I put in a raised stem stitch. So let's do that. And raised stem stitch, you start with making a ladder that you can then do your stitching on. So, and that is as simple as going between each of those sets and going directly apart. The beauty of this stitch is going to be in the uniformity of it. So make this uniform so that you have a nice base ladder to do it on. Make it even and not too tight. I have been known to do this with a ruler, but because I'm doing something that's more botanical here, we're going to have it have a few flaws right within it, and you will see those flaws coming through. It just makes it give it a slightly more botanical look to me. Nature isn't perfect. Perfection is for counting cross stitch and drawn thread. Okay, we got a curve, so we're going to make this one just slightly bigger on this side. Okay, now what you're going to do is, oops, sorry, come up at your edge here. And you're going to just wrap that. Slide it under, go over, keep her down. Oh, kids just met. There. My son was embarrassed that I was in my jammies, so now I have a t-shirt on. There you go. Okay, so we go down the end, and then you can go back up. The thing that you're kind of paying attention to here is that, oh, I've got that one. Don't do that. Okay. What you want to have is, you'll note how when I'm doing this, when I came down, it goes on this side and up on this side, down and over. So when I'm going up, I come up on this side in, and these lines are the same, right? That will become important when they meet in the middle. Okay, I finished all the stem stitch. The next, I want to go through a few interesting stitches. Let's start with satin stitch. I'm going to start with the laid satin stitch. Let's do, whoops. Now, other than stem and split, satin stitch is one of the more common stitches you're going to use. Let's see, we'll go with this one. Okay, so this is a laid satin stitch. This is actually what was used in the Bayou Tapestry. So you're going to lay very straight forward, come down in, and then you come up right beside it, and you're going back. Okay, we just had a bit of a kid break there. All right, so then we fill it up, and same thing, back and forth right to the tip. Okay, and what that gives you on the underside, we'll show you that actually, and it's just an edge all the way around, and that's an away knot. We can just cut that off so you can see it better. So you can see how it's basically, it's a way of conserving. You use less of the material when you do this. That's laid satin stitch. So if you want to turn it into what's called the bayou stitch, let's say you did a large area, you would then put something, a piece of the yarn straight across it, and you would couch that down. And then you come up and you're just, I don't know, every centimeter or so, and you pin it down. And that is all there is to laid satin or the bayou stitch. Okay, and then I want to end up over here. Okay, so we're going to work this in. Now this is going to be laid on top of another fabric, so you can probably get away with knots if you want. Although just weaving in like that is enough. Be careful of the knots you put on the back side of your embroidery, because those knots can show through in the final product, especially when it's put into something. All right, next one is another satin stitch, and this is just your straight up satin stitch. The thing about a satin stitch is it invariably becomes, the edging becomes difficult to get, it's not always perfectly even. So if you want to do a satin stitch, what you could do, those are just my stay stitch. And then I like to take any surface I'm going to do a satin stitch on, and I do a split stitch around the edge. It raises it up a bit. It gives a nice finish to it. Use split stitch on curves, on anything where you need to have a good solid line that doesn't move and it stays exactly where you put it. And so it's an excellent under a stitch edging. So we're going to put split stitch all the way around. I got this leaf overlapping, so we will maybe tuck it underneath. And I just went and did split stitch and didn't explain what a split stitch is, didn't I? Sorry. Okay, let's try this again. With split stitch, what you're doing is you're lying it, put your thread along the line. You go up about 1/2 centimeter and you go in. You then want to bring your needle up halfway through that stitch and split it. The end of the so this is the that's the end of the last stitch. Should be about halfway, and you're coming up, and you just split your stitch. This is an excellent stitch to do with wool. It really looks good. Okay. We now have an edging on that, and we can do the actual satin stitch. Now, when I'm doing a satin stitch, I'm going to, you're planning for the back and forth along, right? I like to, with a leaf of this shape, I like to angle it so that you have the point, so it'll come like this way instead. So you go down a bit, and you come up, and then you angle your needle in underneath that split stitch. And then it's just, but unlike the laid satin, this satin, you go all the way back there and tuck it in. So the back will have as much thread as the front. And then you do things like take it off your needle. Well, see, and I put that off a bit, so if you do make a mistake, you can always go back up. And I was off by a bit, so we can correct it. And tuck it in. Okay, so that's actual satin stitch, and you'll note that my lines changed a bit as I went around because I tightened it around that corner. If you want to ensure that they're absolutely consistent, what you can do is you put down markers. You just put down pieces of thread and then work towards it, and that ensures that the line stays consistent. The big difference is on the back. In the laid satin or the Bayou stitch, you only are on the edges, whereas this, it covers the whole back as well. I do, however, find the edge on that much nicer. The third satin stitch I want to show you is a padded satin stitch, and what you're doing is you just slowly work from the center and you pad it out. You'll note I went this way, and then the next row is perpendicular. And the idea here is not to be perfect. The idea is to add padding because it's all going to get covered up. Okay, and then this one went this way, so the next one will go this way, and that'll be your final padding layer. And again, you don't have to worry about making these perfect. This last one I spend a bit more time on it because it's the one you do before your final layer. Okay. Yeah, I should do the split stitch. Oh no. Okay. So usually I do a split stitch, much like I did the top layer. This one, I'm not going to do a split stitch around the edge on this one because I want to show you the difference it makes. Oh, and guidelines. Okay, so when I said guide markers, what I meant by that is you can go through, and this ensures that you stay level throughout. You would just put in markers. Right? So you know that as you're stitching along, you are staying the same level. It just brings you back to center a bit. And I think with that one, okay, and then we'll just need new thread now. Okay. You see, that was off level with that, so I'm going to correct it. as we did. Okay, turn this on again, and oh, whoops. Okay, so you can see it has a bit more bulk. It raises up. That's why it's called a raised satin stitch. You notice this is why I do a split stitch on the edge. That is a much cleaner edge than either that one or this one, despite these two were actually done the same. So that's why you do your split stitch on the edge. Okay, this is the fishbone stitch. I set up my thread. I'm going to draw a line down the middle to ensure that I'm actually staying on center. So you come up at the point and you go down slightly on that line. You then come up right beside it and you go down over here, just below it and to the side. You then come up here and you come below it down here. And then you just continue in that. Now you can put these as close as far apart as you want, of course. This just, I like seeing a bit of the blue underneath it, especially on the yellow. Outside? Okay, just a minute. Okay, I forgot to turn the camera back on, but I just continued on doing that. and that is the fishbone stitch. The next one I want to do is the raised fishbone stitch, but maybe we should do that in a different color. So let's finish this off. Okay, and that kind of start to wear out again. Okay, again, you need to know where your center line is. So we'll make a center line in that. I also like to know about halfway down. Okay. Going. Just a minute. All right. What were we doing? We were doing raised fishbone. All right. So we'll set this in. You go up to the point and come halfway. I gotta think. I forgot. It's been so long. Okay, you come. Here. We go to the halfway point on the outside. You go to the halfway point directly opposite. And you go back up to the corner. And you just keep repeating that. And then you come down a little further. So you're getting like a self-raising effect happening. And if you wanted to not have a smooth leaf, we could like increase these past. So let's say you want to do a jagged elm leaf edge. You would simply go out further past it. You know, because the design is a guideline, not a rule. Rules are for other embroidery. This is crewel work and surface work. And then you just bring it in a bit. Oh. Okay. This is how the fishbone and then the raised fishbone turn out. This last set, I wanted to do some herringbone because I've seen a lot of herringbone embroidery done here too. Oh, let's do this one, I guess. Now, this will not be filled, so you can't actually do an away knot. Well, you can. We'll do an away knot over here and then clean it up at the back. Okay. Okay. Not sure I like that. trickier, so we better pin that one in. Okay. Okay. So, a herringbone stitch. Oh, let's do a tighter one. Yeah, we want that in the middle. Now, it doesn't give the perfectly evenness because it's an off shape, but it gives a lovely net look. This needs to be finished on the outside, so I'm going to do a split stitch on the outside. So we finished that off with the herringbone. I also wanted to show you the double herringbone stitch. Now, I'm not very good at herringbone, so I have to draw chalk lines. Okay. So it's just leaving a gap in your herringbone and continuing on. So it would come down here. And then that's with that one, you'd skip, let's see. Oh, that one, you don't go here, you would go here. Nope. And it's essentially lacing. And I'm just going to place this over here for now. And we're going to do a different color. Because doing this in two different colors makes it quite nice. Now, this one started up on that side, so this will start on this side. And you are simply going the other direction with the other thread. Okay, and that is a double herringbone stitch. All right, the last one, there are many different types of herringbone stitches. We could pin these. We could tie between and weave threads throughout. You can, if you actually do the double herringbone, so one's not laying on top but they're woven interact back and forth, you can then weave around each of those, and that's what gives you St. Brigid's stitch. I'm going to give you one I think will work well with a leaf here, and it is the close herringbone. And we'll see if we can make that. And essentially, instead of leaving gaps, The idea is to leave it close together. So you go from here down. And I don't know whether it'll work or not, so we'll see. And you just keep going. Okay, and that is the last stitch in the closed herringbone. Okay, I am at the point where all I have to do is the applique over here and the appliques over here. So that's all, most of the surface stitching that's going to happen. I'm going to show you a non-sewing method to make your device. Right? So I pulled out Raoul's device. It is conveniently super easy to make. We're going to use devices as the applique. Okay. Now, let's talk about felt. This is crafter's felt. Okay, it is a bit thicker. It has a little bit of structure. You can get crafter's felt with more structure than this. It is polyester. It's not in any way wool felt. This is the cheap dollar store felt, right? It's super thin, again, a polyester fill. This is actually wool felt, 100% wool. And you can see, you can see through the cheap stuff. But the heavier crafting stuff you get from Michael's is good. And they're a very similar texture. This actually has a bit more structure to it and is a little tougher. That's because this is being used to make other things. I go with the polyester felt. If you want to get period, go period. But for this project, there's so much that is not period materials, just what happened to be at hand, that we're going to go with that. So I'm going to start by doing the yellow background. And this is not high-tech stuff here. I am going to do a gluing method. You can hand sew this, but I'm betting there's a few of you who would be more comfortable just using glue. So I'm going to set this up, let it go overnight, and then sew it on. The beauty of using appliques for your badges is that if you want to give the bag to someone else, you can take that applique off and put on a different one, right? So we're going to go halfway, and now there's two things going to be happening here. Let's just get this cut off and then I'll show you. Okay. Now, applique can be both when you put the device on top of another one, right? But as well, you could do something along this line. We'll just get that in place and pin it. Okay. And then we get some finer needles, scissors. As far as I can tell, pretty much anything went in the Middle Ages. If you can think of it now, they thought of it and they did it. The most classic example that I know of a wool felt is the Tristan hanging. We're just going to keep that. The other one you need to pull out is the circle. Yeah, I think we can just make a circle. I don't think that needs to be perfect. Now, now you applique, or in this case glue, one felt piece onto another, and you get, there's device like yellow on that side. Okay. The big thing if you're going to use glue in an embroidery project is don't glue right up at the edges, because glue is actually quite hard to sew through. So just avoid that if you can at all. Avoid the edges. This has a name. I can't remember what the name is. Just give me a minute. Maybe my brain will kick in. Alright. Look at that. Baron's device. Okay, this is in Tarsa. It's where you have the background showing through. This is actually an applique where you have it layered on top. Okay, we're going to let that sit overnight and come back and sew it on in the morning. Though actually it's firming up quite fast, so that's good. Okay, so this was supposed to be about applique, so we're going to start with talking a bit about applique itself. We've done all our surface embroidery here, and you could the baseland applique, you then do the surface embroidery, and now we're going to do surface applique as well. So you add your color in, and then we're going to add in the surface embroidery. We'll just turn this so it's a little better. Okay? So this was supposed to be about applique. There's a couple different approaches to applique. The first one is having your background fabric and then appliquing on top of it. This adds in a lot of sparkle and color to what you're doing, but it is a very modern aesthetic. A more medieval aesthetic is to have your background fabric and then very much to add bits and pieces to it. So because this is a Myrgan wood thing, I cut out a little leaf and just pulled it out of the red felt. And we're going to do a surface applique, right? And so cut her out, kind of figure out where you want it to go, where it looks pretty to you. Pin her in, and then you pin that down, and then we will surface applique around it. So now you could actually use sewing thread to pin it, which might work better, but we'll go with this, I think. About there. Okay. Now, I'm just going to edge this all. You could whip stitch it and then put a different edging on it. I'm just going to do a whip stitch all the way around. Remember, you're adding color in. You can embroidery while you do your felt work as well. And there's many, many different approaches to doing this. It truly is just whatever aesthetic works for you. I've seen people do this with larger pieces and the zigzag on machine. And that works well. Takes a lot of time, but not an issue. Okay, and we'll just keep going there. a mistake. Okay, the base of the applique, that is how you do an applique leaf. I also wanted to kind of personalize this. Remember the badge we made last night, Raoul's badge? What this does, first of all, we're going to clean it up a bit because, you know, no point having. And it just makes for a nice piece of drama. So you can, the joy of the badges is that I can do a quick whip stitch, and then if they decide that, okay, we don't actually want to use this for Roxanne and Raoul, they can take those badges off. I also did a badge for Roxanne. It is a bit rough because a cat's a bit harder to do. I stuck with the felt and did a bit of velvet to give it texture, and I just did it. Don't worry about it. You'll figure that one out later. So we'll tuck them in there. And you don't want to go, remember the circle, that's where we're going to applique it on. So we don't want to put it too far underneath there. May have got, they started out the same size, but now I kind of used up. The sewing on Roxanne's caused an issue. Okay. I don't know. What do you think? Does that look good? Something like that? Do you want to see them both? Somewhere along that line? And you just kind of do it. I don't know how to say that other than you just do it. Okay, so let's pin that into place. And maybe we should put Roxanne. Yeah, I think. What do you think? Roxanne or Raoul on top? No, that covers that up. Yeah, they can cuddle because I don't want to take up too much of the tree. So sorry, Raoul. You're covering too much of the tree. Well, maybe we could turn it a bit. There. Something like that. I think that works. Let's go with that. And something you do when you're doing embroidery a lot is just kind of stand back and look at it and say, do I like that? Because it is a piece of artwork and it's your artwork, and just do what looks right to you. Let's go with that. You should actually use a sewing needle for this one, because you don't want the holes to show up. This is a sewing needle. Can you see that? I don't know if you can see the difference. It has to do with your hole size. Oh, and then I just took it because I got skilled. Okay. And I don't like the blue thread, so we're going to go find a different color of thread.